Imagine a civilization that shaped two-thirds of what we now call Western civilization. A people with a rich history of culture, innovation, and resilience. You think you know Iran from today's headlines? But what if its ancient kings were venerated as saviors by the Jewish people, and its conflicts with the Greeks forged the very ideals of democracy and liberty? This is the untold story of Persia. Join us on the Liberty Brief podcast and discover why freeing the Iranian people is a moral imperative and why this nation truly matters.
America's founders are calling. It's your opportunity to respond. This is the Liberty Brief podcast with your host, Robert Melso, featuring Dr. Thomas Giordano. The Liberty Brief Podcast, Episode 34, Why Does Iran Matter? Welcome to Episode 34 of the Liberty Brief Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Melso, and today we're going to take a really fascinating journey way back to the ancient world. Imagine a civilization that shaped two-thirds of what we now call Western civilization, a people with a rich history of culture, innovation, and resilience. Yet today, the Iranian people live under a fundamentalist, radical Shiite regime that threatens not only their freedom, but also regional and global stability. This is the story of Persia, and why freeing the Iranian people is a moral imperative for all of us. You know, sometimes you define yourselves not by what you are, but by what you aren't. Like, I'm a coffee drinker, not a tea drinker. A small personal anecdote, but hey, it makes me me. Well, imagine that on a civilizational scale. While we often think of civilizations clashing and defining themselves in opposition, as we'll see, the Greeks, the Persian Empire also played a pivotal and profoundly positive role in shaping the identity of another ancient people, the Hebrews. This ancient interaction, where a powerful Persian king facilitated the return and rebirth of the Jewish nation, provides a fascinating historical context to the ongoing relationship and recent events involving Israel and Iran today. This episode is the first in a two-part series. Next time we'll look into the history of Iran from the Elizabethan era right up to the present day. But for now, let's begin with the past. Here to walk us through this story, which, no surprise, profoundly shaped what we now call Western civilization, is my co-host, Dr. Tom Giordano, author of the book, Unalienable, What It Really Means and Why It Matters. Dr. Tom, it's always a pleasure to have you.
Hey, Rob, it's great to be here. I love talking about this stuff. And you're right about that identity by opposition idea. It's a huge theme in this period of time.
Well, before we start, I just have a question. Why are we even talking about Iran? Why does Iran matter? It's just, to most of it, it's sort of a backward country run by fundamentalists who are out to destroy America, perhaps Western civilization. They're more interested in funding terrorism and making bombs than anything else. But that's their leadership, I know that. But the people are something different. Maybe you can enlighten me.
Well, what you're talking about is a small infection into the Persian culture that's only been there since 1979. The contemporary view of Iran is quite erroneous. The Persian people are a great people. They have an extremely long history. And as you mentioned in the beginning, they have had a huge impact on Western civilization, even though we don't consider them part of Western civilization. They have had a huge impact on Western civilization just by their existence.
Okay, well, then let's begin. I'd like to start with the relationship between the Persians and the Greeks. And then we'll look at the relationships that the Persians had with the Jews. But let's kick off things by setting the stage. We're talking about the Achaemenid Persian Empire. For many of us, our knowledge might be limited to Hollywood movies. So tell us, who are these guys and what kind of monumental power was this, seemingly appearing out of nowhere to challenge the nascent Greek world?
Well, Rob, they certainly didn't, appear out of nowhere. The Achaemenid Empire was the first Persian empire, founded by a really legendary figure called Cyrus the Great around 550 BC. So we're talking about 2,500 years ago, right? Cyrus basically united the Medes and the Persians. And then he went on a serious conquering spree where he took over Lydia, which would be parts of Asia Minor, Babylon, and even Egypt. That eventually fell under his influence, and then that of his son. Greek historians had different takes on him. Herodotus, often called the father of history, as we spoke about previously, credits Cyrus with organizing the empire and initiating its expansion. But then you have Xenophon. You remember we talked about Xenophon. In his Cyropaedia, he went full-blown idealist and portrayed Cyrus as the model ruler, sometimes even contradicting Herodotus.
Didn't you speak of Xenophon in a previous episode?
Yes, we spoke about his book Anabasis, where he recounts the story of leading 10,000 Spartan mercenaries out of a hostile Persian territory after a failed coup between two brothers for the control of the Achaemenid Empire. That's what we discussed, but that was much later on in the history. Cyrus the Great's son, Cambyses II, picked up where Cyrus left off, continuing the expansion into Egypt, Cyrenaica, and Nubia. His reign ended with some internal drama, as often happens with empires, led to a bit of a succession crisis. Bardia, also known as Smerdis, another son of Cyrus the Great, so it would be the brother of Cambyses, briefly ruled after Cambyses. His reign was short and controversial, with Darius I, who was the son of Cambyses, claiming that Bardia was an imposter. And as we'll see later, so did the Hebrews. The Hebrews claimed he was an imposter. For a brief time, Smerdis interrupted the reconstruction of the Second Temple, which is important. But we'll touch on that later. This is where Darius I, also known today as Darius the Great, steps in. Okay, he seized the throne, consolidated the empire, and was quite the administrator, introducing reforms, building roads, and eventually promoting Zoroastrianism. He further expanded the empire, but, and this is the big but for our story today, he notably failed to conquer Greece. This was the important thing.
I've heard of Zoroastrianism, but really don't know what it is. Can you give us a brief explanation?
Yeah, very briefly, Zoroastrianism is one of the oldest continuously practiced religions. It originated in ancient Persia around the 6th century BC. So this was about the same time as Cyrus. It was founded by a prophet named Zoroaster. Sometimes we call him Zarathustra. Okay, so you remember that music, "Thus Spake Zarathustra"? That's what they were talking about.
Gotcha.
It centers around a belief of a single supreme deity, Ahura Mazda, who represents goodness and order in the universe. The basic tenets adhere to the principles of ethical dualism, where good and evil are seen as opposing forces in constant conflict. Okay? So it worships Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of good, and opposes Angra Mainyu, who is the evil spirit.
You know, I just had a conversation with a friend of mine about good and evil. We talked about the idea that if there is supreme good, well, let's put it this way. If there's supreme evil, conversely, there should be supreme good. He's an atheist.
Yeah.
He wouldn't concede that point.
Yeah, because it's all relative to him. But you see, Zoroastrianism, and this is important, Zoroastrianism is a concept of good and evil, absolute good and absolute evil.
That's what we were talking about. If there is absolute evil, then there must also be absolute good.
It's the dualism. It's yin yang. It's an objective dualism. And thank God the Persians took this religion to heart, because it would open up a relationship with the Jews that at the time were recently liberated from Babylonia. And this is important. It's important in our story of Western civilization too. But so
Okay,
I guess we'll touch on this a little bit later
let's
on.
get back to that. We have this colossus of an empire,
Yeah,
incredibly well organized, expanding rapidly,
right.
covering big swaths of territory. And then they bump into these, well, relatively speaking, tiny Greek city-states.
Yeah.
And so what happens? How did that initial contact escalate into the Greco-Persian Wars that defined the era?
Well, the first real flirtation, if we could call it that, happened in 507 BC, when Athens actually sought an alliance with Persia. Okay, and guess what they offered as symbols of submission? Earth and water. Can you believe it? My mind boggles, thinking about Athenian democracy, a beacon of freedom, doing that, wanting to align with an empire. Okay, but Athens quickly had a change of heart, later rejecting Persian interference and tyranny, and it was a wise move. Because it was the polar opposite of what they had believed in. The real spark that lit the fuse of retribution was the Ionian Revolt from 499 to 494 BC. Greek cities in Asia Minor under Persian rule rebelled, and Athens came to their support. Darius I saw this support as a direct act of defiance, and that's what directly prompted him to seek retribution against the Greek mainland. Now, that retaliation came in 490 BC with the first Persian invasion of Greece. This is where the Athenians, against all odds, famously defeated Darius's forces at the Battle of Marathon. Okay, that's where we get the Olympics from. That's where we get the term marathon for runners. This wasn't just a battle. It was a defining moment for Athenian democracy and Greek self-confidence. It showed that these seemingly invincible Persians could be beaten. So that's the beginning. That's the first Persian War. Now, it's interesting to note that after this, Darius dies. Okay. After this, his son Xerxes the first, took the throne. And he led a truly massive second Persian invasion of Greece from 480 to 479. It only lasted a year. This is when we see those legendary stands at Thermopylae with the Spartans, a decisive naval battle at Salamis, and then a final land victory at Plataea, all right, which forced the Persians to withdraw. These setbacks, while perhaps minor to the vast Persian Empire, were crucial in establishing Greece as the foundation of Western civilization. It gave the Greeks an identity that they didn't have before. They were never united. They started calling themselves Hellenes to distinguish themselves from the other, the Persian, the barbarian. Okay?
So these pesky Greeks, these little tiny nation states.
Our people. This is our history, buddy.
They went from kowtowing to these folks, offering submission, to downright defiance and stunning victories. It sounds like these events weren't just about territory or military might. They were deeply about identity they found themselves against an overwhelming power. How did these Greek sources, particularly those historians we mentioned, like Herodotus and Xenophon, portray the Persians? Did they see them as worthy adversaries, or maybe something else entirely?
No, that's an excellent point, Rob, because the Greek perspective is absolutely central to how we understand this clash of civilizations. Herodotus in Historia, in histories, provides a detailed account of those wars and gives us a mixed portrayal. He recognized the Persians as powerful, wealthy, and skilled, especially in cavalry and archery. But he didn't shy away from highlighting their hubris, uh, overconfidence, and strategic errors, which, in his view, led to their downfall against the more disciplined Greek forces. He framed it as a sort of David and Goliath struggle. That's how we would look at it. The small free Greeks against this vast Persian Empire. So that's how he looked at it. Xenophon, on the other hand, initially offered an idealized view of Cyrus, okay, even admiring some Persian customs. But, and this is important, later Greek writers and editors emphasized negative stereotypes, using his work, reinforcing an image of Persians as decadent and effeminate. Okay, it was the classic case of historical interpretation evolving over time. But while they were doing that, they were creating their own identity for themselves, which they did not have before the Persian conflicts. Okay, ultimately, the Greeks came to view the Persian Empire as the archetype of autocracy and barbarism, in stark contrast to their ideals of freedom and civic life. To be Greek was to be free, rational, and self governing, while Persians were seen as mere subjects of a king and non Greek speakers, hence the term barbarians. All right.
You know, it's really fascinating how these narratives, especially Herodotus, became so foundational to Greek self-identity. We talked about the empires and the battles and touched on how the Greeks viewed the Persians. But what about how this clash truly defined the geographical and ideological boundaries of what we now call Western civilization, and how it cemented ideas of democracy and liberty against that perceived Eastern autocracy?
Well, you've hit on perhaps the most important impact of these wars. The Greco-Persian Wars truly were a pivotal moment in ancient history because they explicitly established a clear boundary, both geographical and ideological, between the Greek world and the Persian world. This demarcation, as the sources emphasize, became foundational to the concept of Western civilization. Now, you have to understand what we call Turkey today, the Greeks called Asia, not China, not Japan, not Korea. Asia to them was what we call today Turkey, Anatolia, that area there. So, at its core, this was fundamentally a clash between two contrasting civilizations: the centralized autocratic Persian Empire on the one side, and then you had the independent, often democratic Greek city states like Athens and Sparta and the others. Okay. On the other hand, so the Greek victories weren't just about military success, they were about preserving their very way of life. These successes not only halted Persian expansion into Europe, but also preserved the political autonomy and cultural development of the Greek city states. All right? Think about it. Without these successes, Greek society might have been subsumed under Persian rule, potentially stifling the unique developments that would later define Western civilization: philosophy, science, democracy, art, right? What would Western civilization have become without these fundamental Greek contributions?
Well, I'm guessing that we'd be without baklava.
Yeah, yeah. Uzo. We have no uzo. Nothing. No. No souvlaki. No kiro. No niente. Anyway, yeah. But so the thing is that this defeat had a demarcation. That side is east. This side is west. That's where we get the term Western civilization. Herodotus and the other Greek writers consistently contrast the freedom of the Greeks with the slavery of the Persians. This wasn't just rhetoric, it was a deeply ingrained ideological distinction that shaped the West's enduring dichotomy between East and West and became a core element of Western self identification or definition. The shared experience of resisting the Persian conquest forced a collective Greek identity where the Persians became the other, like I said, reinforcing unity among Greek communities.
So I'm paraphrasing you now, but there was a unity or identity born from the opposition.
Right, exactly.
And it seems like this contrast wasn't just cultural, but deeply political. We have this vast Persian Empire, a centralized monarchy, and then these little tiny Greek city-states experimenting with self-governance. How did the Persian Wars specifically influence the development and flourishing of democracy, particularly in, say, Athens? Did it cement this ideological divide between kingship and civic participation, democracy, as you called it?
Right, right. Well, there's no question that the political contrast was central. No question. The Achaemenid Persian Empire was the ultimate example of monarchy and centralized power, right? And this would be a model that throughout the rest of Western civilization would be something to be fought against. Even our founding fathers did not want a centralized power. Okay, this history goes all the way back to this era. From the Greek perspective, it was seen as the archetype of autocracy and barbarism.
They called it barbarism, barbaric to have a king.
No. Barbarism referred to the speech, the language. To the Greeks, what they heard when other people speak was ba 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 ba. So they called it barbarism. It's not because of a barba, a beard. Barbarism. Even Greeks, even Hellenes within the Greek sphere, they would refer to people who they didn't understand speaking the same language as barbaric, like the Macedonians, for example. The Athenians would have said, these Macedonians, even though they're Greek, they're barbarians because we can't understand what they're saying. In Italy, it became cafone. Chi sto cafone qua. We say, this cafone. That comes from cacophone, which means that when you hear them speaking, these were people out.
It's discordant.
Exactly. It was discordant sounds outside of Naples, basically.
It's sort of like Sigis.
Right. Well, it was anybody outside of Naples in particular. This sound that I hear these people speaking, to me, it's just a cacophony of sound, right? So we call them cafone.
Okay. It's
the same type of argument. Barbarian.
Don't let me get you off track.
Well, non essere un cafone, ma t'ha fatto unire talazzo. Anyway, this is what they meant by barbarian. It didn't have any other reference other than the way they spoke. Okay, Persians were depicted as living under the domination of a single great king, and that was in stark contrast to the Greek ideal of self-governance. But in Athens, though, it was particularly important. The wars were a catalyst in Athens. The Persian Wars catalyzed the development of democracy there because Athens successfully defended itself at Marathon. It demonstrated that a seemingly invincible Persians could be defeated and boosted Athenian democracy by showing the effectiveness of the hoplite citizen soldiers. These were farmers normally, but when they were called up, they had to fight. And they were shown to be more how could I say this, more propelled to fight and defend their own property than a slave being ordered to fight by the king. They had more to lose. The slave only had his life to lose, but the Greeks, they had their lands to lose. They had their families to lose. They had, so they were more, impelled to fight with more fiercely. All right. But there was another thing that happened in Athens: a navy. These wars prompted Athens to build a powerful navy and embrace broader civic participation, which directly gave rise to direct democracy and new opportunities for social mobility within the city. After all, the rowers that were out there rowing these triremes, they came from all social classes, and they were crucial to the naval victory at Salamis. How could you deny them a voice in government if they risked their lives on the high seas fighting to save Athens? So with the fighting and everything, they gained more social status, and their voices had to be heard. So the Greek victory was interpreted as proof of the superiority of the Greek political systems, democracy, freedom, over Persian monarchy and despotism. It validated the unique approach to governance. This period then directly led to the rise of Athens and the flourishing of the Golden Age. This is where the Golden Age of Greece begins, of Athens in particular. This is known as the Pentagontatia, okay? It's a 50-year period after these wars. And during this time is when we see all these developments. Democracy, philosophy, literature, art, they all thrived in Athens. And they became a model for later Western civilizations, or Western societies, I should say. These cultural and political developments, spurred by the Persian Wars, ultimately became the bedrock of Western civilization. So, knowing it or not knowing it, the Persians contributed this one leg to the three legs of Western civilization. Okay?
Tom, it's incredible to think about how these battles, those specific moments of defiance, didn't just win a war, but arguably laid the groundwork for an entire philosophical and political system that still resonates with us today. It was central to the birth of Western civilization. It's remarkable, Dr. Tom, how this ancient contest, a direct confrontation between distinct ways of life, has provided such an enduring framework for understanding opposing political philosophies. The stand taken by the Greek city-states, for instance, by valuing self-governance, individual freedom, shaped a trajectory that continues to resonate today, even with our own country.
Absolutely.
What we've explored today truly illustrates how a historical struggle can set a precedent by analyzing global narratives of freedom versus centralized power, something you and I have talked about many times.
Yes. What's truly remarkable is that we're talking about a time frame lasting from about 550 BC to the defeat of the Achaemenid Empire by Alexander the Great in 330 BC. Darius III was murdered by his own generals, and their dynastic line ended. So the Achaemenid Empire basically only lasted, what are we talking, 200 years? 200 years. And this has left an impact on us almost, 2,600 years later. All right.
Dr. Tom, I feel like we should switch tracks a little bit and talk about the Hebrews.
Oh, okay.
I think that this discussion is important for us to understand the relationship between the Jews and the Iranians today.
Yes.
The news media wants to give us the impression of a burning hatred between these people. But is that really the case? I mean, we're talking about the leadership of Iran, not the people.
Absolutely not the case. Absolutely not. There is a very, very long history of mutual respect between the Persians and the Jews. Cyrus the Great issued the Edict of Cyrus, sometimes identified as the Cyrus Cylinder, which is described in the Hebrew Bible as a royal proclamation that authorized and encouraged the repatriation of displaced populations in the region. This event is called the Return to Zion, marking the resurgence of Jewish life in what had become the self-governing Persian province of Yehud. Okay, the reign of the Persian king Darius the Great saw the completion of the Second Temple, signifying a period of renewed Jewish hope and religious revival. So
Cyrus the Great, in fact, played a profoundly positive role in shaping the identity of the Hebrews.
Oh, there's no question. Cyrus is credited in the Hebrew Bible for liberating the Jewish people from their 70-year Babylonian captivity, which began in 587 BC and ended in 538 BC, allowing them to return to Jerusalem. Most importantly, he supported the building of their temple. He even collected as many of the sacred vessels taken from Solomon's temple by the Babylonians and returned them to the Jewish people. He also provided the funds for building materials. This act was so significant that he is venerated as a messiah in the Jewish tradition, the only non-Jew to hold this distinction. This was a dynastic effort, and the reconstruction of the Second Temple was a policy of the Persian kings, with the brief exception of the reign of Smerdis the impostor. It was reinstituted by Darius I, and this ancient interaction where, let's say, powerful Persian kings facilitated the return and rebirth of the Jewish nation provides a fascinating historical context to the ongoing relationship and recent events involving Israel and Iran today. You cannot look at what's going on today in Iran as a consequence of the entire history of the Persian people with the Jewish people. This malarkey that's going on only has a beginning in 1979, and it's being led by a bunch of miscreants. It's not not the Persian people. The Persian people have no beef with the Jewish people, and vice versa.
Okay, well, regarding the history, could you refresh our memories of these temples? Wasn't the Temple of Solomon first?
Yes, Solomon's temple was it was commissioned by King Solomon. It was sacked and destroyed during the siege of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar II of the Neo-Babylonian Empire in 587 BC. It existed between the 10th and the 6th centuries BC. The sacred artifacts that it housed were taken back to Babylon, with the exception of the Ark of the Covenant.
So when did the reconstruction begin? I mean, why was the Second Temple so important?
It was absolutely fundamentally important. The Second Temple was constructed around 516 BC and later enhanced by Herod the Great in about 18 BC. So sometimes they call it Herod's Temple. Its existence defines the Second Temple period for the Jews and was a monumental symbol of Jewish identity. It is where we get the term Second Temple Judaism. The Second Temple served as the chief place of worship, ritual sacrifice, or the Korban, the communal gathering for the Jewish people, among whom it regularly attracted pilgrims for the three pilgrimage festivals, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. So it was extremely important.
Now this was the temple that we're all familiar with, the temple that the Romans destroyed.
Right. This was the Second Temple. In 70 AD, at the height of the First Jewish-Roman War, the Second Temple was destroyed by a Roman siege of Jerusalem, resulting in a cataclysmic shift in Jewish history. Right, the Sephardim in Spain were the result of this. They fled Jerusalem and wound up in Spain, for example. The loss of the Second Temple prompted the development of Rabbinic Judaism, which remains mainstream for the Jewish religious practices today, globally.
You know, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but before we wrap up today, let's take a look ahead. Maybe we can go over what happened after that temple was destroyed in the next podcast. And that'll be the direct follow-up. Explore the story of modern-day Iran, tracing its evolution from the Elizabethan era to the present. And Dr. Tom, I think we could discuss the recent conflict with the Israelis and how these events are shaping the region today.
Yeah.
I feel the need to summarize what we've covered so far. We've taken a journey of sorts through the fascinating history of Persia, from its ancient empires and cultural achievements to its lasting legacy in the world. And we've seen how its innovations in Greek governance, philosophy, and the arts are a result of Persian setbacks that have echoed through the centuries. Their sponsorship of the Jewish people and reviving their culture has also had long-lasting impacts, and it still touches us today.
And it's important to remember that Persia's influence goes far beyond its borders. If we think about it, and if we consider Western civilization as being the traditions and advancements of three primary cities, Athens, Jerusalem, and Rome, Persia was responsible for indirectly shaping 2/3 of what we now call Western civilization. Their historical legacy is deeply woven into the fabric of our modern world. So it's not just you're looking at them as some people living in a desert somewhere. It's very, very important.
We can look forward to that next discussion, Dr. Tom, where we connect the past to the present. And we'll examine how Iran's rich history continues to impact global events today. So as you listen, remember, the story of Persia is not just ancient history. It's a living call to support the Iranian people and their quest for freedom. And that cause matters to the U.S., to the world, and to anyone who values the enduring ideals of civilization. So I want to thank you, Dr. Tom.
Well, thank you, Rob.
And I want to thank our audience for listening. Until then, we'll see you next time. You've been listening to The Liberty Brief, based on the book Unalienable, What It Really Means and Why It Matters by Dr. Thomas Giordano. If you want to help spread the word, please subscribe, like, and share using the links below. You can also check out Dr. Giordano's book on Amazon using the links as well.